And we're going to keep going. A flat to D flat to G flat to C flat. Now notice that this is a nice, easy, predictable, stable sounding descent by circle of fifths, right? Fifth, 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 fifth. Okay. And it's sort of at a point in the music where I think the Phantom is trying to express stability, right? So we did this. So last time we unstabilized it, but destabilized it, we're going. But this time he's going. Like really beautiful, right? And stays beautiful till right here. That's when he decides to pull the rug out from you. So let's talk about how that happened. Like, why did he do it differently this time? I think the reason this section exists is because he wanted to give you a sense of stability in a home so that he could contrast it against descents by tritones. Because he's going to introduce 3 descending tritones in the next section, which is really interesting. So let's talk about that. But first, I want to point out something about the interaction with the melody in this descending circle of fifths. So we're singing over the 3rd note of the A flat major triad, C, right? When we go down a fifth, that note becomes the major 7th, which is something to keep in mind. If you're singing the 3rd note of a major triad, you go down by 5th, suddenly you're going to have the major 7. Now, that's a really evocative sound. And the reason it's so evocative is because while this is beautiful, if you take the middle notes out, you just get a major 7th, which is really dissonant, right? It's a minor 2nd inverted. And so it's a really interesting chord because if you play it with the inner notes, it's so beautiful and soft and gentle, but take these out and you've got that tension. So it's a chord that both conveys warmth and gentleness, but also tension. So it's an interesting interval choice for him to have him sing over right there. It's probably on purpose. Raging fire shall down by 5th to G flat. So and if you're wondering if that last thing was accidental, what rich desire, he does it again. Right, so he's definitely juicing that major 7th sound. He unlocks its door. Do you need? Now that's gorgeous. Why did he do that? He just went from C flat major to C flat minor. Why did he do that? Is it because it sounds cool? Because it does sound cool. It totally sounds cool. This oh, you're so into it, and then this it's gorgeous. So it's always worth it in looking at these songs to see if it was prosodic. Did he do it because he wanted there was something in the lyrics that he wanted specifically to highlight or express? Well, it's worth a look. Let's look at the lyrics through here. So, what raging fire shall flood the soul? Okay, pretty straightforward. What rich desire unlocks its door? Okay, I don't know. That's a little on the nose. No, what sweet seduction lies before you? I don't know. Maybe you think that that's what's going on. It's not really clear to me. So let's look at it from a music theory point of view instead. It's really conspicuous that when he gets to the G flat, which, okay, we're in C flat, which is it's 7 flats. So you can think of it in sort of B major if you want to, but whatever, we'll stick with C flat for now. The dominant's going to be G flat. So when we go from this to this, it's a very bright sound, even though we modulate to the minor for a second. So, because you're going to use the dominant's going to be major, whether you're major or minor. So, like that's so bright sounding. Even with a D flat, really kind of emphasizes it. Like, oh, it's so bright sounding. Okay, so what are we trying to do at this point? Like, this is the section where we need to get back to F minor, which is kind of crazy because we're currently in C flat, which has 7 flats. We have to get to F minor, which has 4 flats. That's 3 accidentals changing in one go, and that's a lot to change. So what's going on here? Well, it's always hard to know exactly what they were thinking, but one good way to do it is to go to where you're headed and then go build backwards from there. So we know we're going to F minor. We're probably going to get there through the dominant, C major, right? Okay, so from C major, before then he does this G minor 7 flat 7, which is basically a G diminished. Okay, that's cool. G diminished to C major to F minor. That makes a lot of sense actually, because G diminished is in F minor, right? If you take F minor and then you take a chord based on the 2nd scale degree, it's going to be diminished. That's what happens in minor keys. If you're in A minor, where it's all white keys, if you build a chord off the 2nd scale degree, which is B, it's going to be diminished. Okay, so that's just in the key. That's a diatonic, right? So from this chord, from the G going down to fifth to C, going down to F minor, that's just 2-5-1. Okay, cool. All right, that's a very stable, way of getting back to F minor. But like, what about this thing from G flat to G diminished? What's going on there? Because, okay, now we're going to invoke something called the Neapolitan chord. So what he could have done is taken this G flat major chord and said, you know what this is? Since we're going to F minor, this is actually the Neapolitan chord. It's a major chord based on the flat 2, okay? If this goes by too quick, go Google Neapolitan chord. All it means is a major chord based on the flat 2. So if you're in F minor, it tends to get used in minor more than major. F minor. The second scale degree of F minor is G, and that's going to be this G diminished. And so you don't use the flat 2 in the F minor scale. Flat 2 doesn't show up. But if you make a major chord based on it, it has this really interesting quality. And you can use it as a predominant. In other words, the chord you use before you go to the dominant on your way home. And it sounds like this. And it's got a really distinctive sound that may sound like, I don't know, vampire music or whatever, which is fitting in this case, right? So that's your flat 2. It's a major chord based on the flat 2. It's a predominant chord because it means it's going to go to the dominant, which in this case is C major, back to F minor. Let's just remember that the 5 chord is not automatically a dominant. If you're using it in some other context other than going home to F minor, it's going to be C minor. But because we're using it on our way home, it's the dominant because it goes back to the tonic. We're going to make it major. Okay, so that progression is actually super cool and would be really fitting in this context because it sounds so neato. By the way, the Neapolitan chord often gets used in first inversion, which in this case would look like this. Now it's worth noting that this makes the bass the 4th note of the F minor scale. And at that point, you're kind of doing 4, 5, 1. So it's kind of like that, but instead of the 4, you're getting this flat 2. And what happens there is you get this motion. D, D, D. So you're a half step above, half step below, back to the tonic. Okay, so it's kind of like you're taking a 4 chord in F minor, and you're just raising that from F, which is your home, up a little bit so you can get that extra tension, because then the dominant's going to be a half step below, T, to there. And that's what, when you hear that sound, that's kind of what you're hearing, is this D, D, D. That's what makes a Neapolitan so cool. Okay, so maybe that's what he was thinking. Maybe he's like G, the G flat, which is right, almost F minor, it's flat 2 F minor, G to the dominant to the F minor. So why didn't he just do that? Well, let's try it, right? So we do D, 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 D. Oh, lordy, that doesn't work. Why doesn't that work? It's supposed to work. I just played it for you in another context. It sounds great. I think here's the problem, and this might have been the problem he actually ran into when he was writing this, is we just did this like C flat, D, 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 and from here, when you go to G flat being the 5, D, D, especially singing that note on top of it, it just sounds so darn bright. It'd be hard to pick a chord in a context that sounded more hopeful than the 5 in a major key, right? Even though we just kind of slipped into minor for a second. And the D flat really helps too. I don't know, we can examine that. But either way, it sounds really bright. So the problem is that when you play a Neapolitan chord in a minor key, it sounds gloomy. Let's say if we're in the if I now play you a G flat, does that sound bright and happy? Not at all, right? It sounds like really gloomy. Because you're hearing F minor, you're hearing these 4 black notes, right? So when you hear that, this sounds like a crazy chromatic step up from your minor tonic, which it is. And so it's like da dum bum. So in the context of F minor, a major chord that's based on the flat 2 sounds gloomy. B, B, B. But in this context, it wasn't that. It very much was like the opposite of that. We were doing this D, 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 D. It couldn't sound much brighter there. So when you take it from this to this, you're like, what? I don't buy it. I can't hear this as the flat 2 in a minor key because I'm so busy hearing it as the dominant. It just doesn't work to go to C major there. He's like, shucks, that's not going to work. What else can I do? He's like, well, let's just keep building back then. We got F minor. We know we have to go through the dominant. Let's go up a fifth and see what happens. Dominant, 5 to 1. That works fine. Okay, cool. So he's like, okay, can I get from G flat to G diminished? Yeah, that works pretty well, right? So let's try that. D, 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 D. Yeah, totally, I can do that. And then we'll go down to 5 to 1. Okay, cool. But I think he didn't really like this. It was a little too on the nose. Like, it's smooth for sure. I think he wanted to bring in another tritone descent. Now, let's look at where we are in C flat in the beginning. From here to F minor is a tritone. Something to keep in mind. Like, a bunch of accidentals change too, but it's worth noting that that's a tritone, okay? Now, if we're gonna go down like that, that's all well and good, but I think he's like, let's throw in another tritone descent here. So I think that's where the D flat came from. So I think this is what happened, is he was doing this. He's like, I need this to go to that, to go to that, to go to that. So let's do this. D, 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 D. Let's take that to the D. D, 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 D. And then we'll keep going, and now we've got our D flat. And nobody even noticed, right? And now when we go to the G, there's this really cool tritone descent. And it's like a really crunchy way of getting there. Now, that's cool. It's also noting that if we take out that G, this technically was a Neapolitan, a flat 2, on our way to F minor, and that would be the same tritone. When you do a flat 2 predominant, you go down to C major, that's a tritone. Okay, so even though we didn't do that in a straight shot, so we went through the G, it's still kind of hiding in there, like it's in there. That tritone's there. So we've got C flat to F, our overall arching chord motion is a tritone. We've got this D flat he threw in there to bring us to the G. And then we've got the G flat, which is heading to the C as the dominant on our way to F minor. Okay, now how he was thinking about this, I don't know for sure. I think what I sketched out might be it. So we finally got here, and then back. So that's my best guess. And I hope that's interesting. I know it's really windy, but anyway, I hope that was fun. And then we'll do the last page here.